doesn't even translate. And the Japanese have a thing called ame. And ame means it's where you have a relationship with somebody and that somebody takes care of you completely. You're potentially an adult. And that person does everything for you. It's like your mother won't let you grow up, so it's kind of like Howard on Big Bang Theory, if you've ever watched that television show. Howard, his mother used to cut his meat for him. The first night that Bernadette spent at Howard's house, they made breakfast the next day, and they made him pancakes. And he said he wanted butter, and of course it was Mrs. Butterworth with butter in it, in the syrup. And then Bernadette left, and he said, well, I guess I'll cut my pancakes by myself. Like he had never cut his own pancakes. I know, and he cut his pancakes with a knife. Who cuts their pancakes with a knife? That's not right. You have to cut your pancakes with a fork, right? Isn't that the way it works? Okay. I've been to Denny's before. I know how you cut your pancakes. Anyway, so ame is kind of like Howard. Howard is being babied by his mother. But it's also, in Japan, it can also be a spouse taking care of her husband. And she'll do everything for him. And it seems inappropriate. And there doesn't seem to be any reciprocity. In other words, she doesn't really get anything from it. And that's known as ame. Now, we really don't have the same thing in the United States. We don't have, there is no word for spoiled beyond rotten. But in Japan, they have a special word for it, as exciting as that is. The first year I was here, I asked if this was something that happened on this reservation, and they said, yeah, we see that from time to time. There are people that let their parents or whoever, or their wives, take care of them to the extent that they act almost like children. And that would be ame, but of course we don't have a word for it. Has anybody ever seen anybody that is treated that way around here? No? No, all the men are tough and all the women are tougher. And nobody takes care of anybody else. And they were wrong the first year I was here. They were just feeding me a line, which sometimes happens. Sometimes students will lie to their professors just so that we get in trouble. So what do you think? Have you ever seen this? Where somebody was so babied by somebody, maybe in their 20s or 30s, they're a guy, I got thank you. But it's probably Amber that said it anyway. Anyway, that's ame. We don't have a word for it in the United States. The Germans have a word, Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude means finding joy in other people's pain, which sounds horrible. It's almost like sadism, isn't it? But they have a special word for it, but we don't really have that same word in the United States. We don't have anything in the United States. We don't have the concept of finding joy in other people's misery. And that's really what it means. Now, if you understand, of course, so we had soldiers going over to Germany during World War II, and of course they freed. My dad was one of the guys that freed one of the concentration camps. And they saw things that he would never talk about because it was so god-awful. But the Germans, and of course, he's not German. My dad certainly wasn't German. Bradway, that's an English name. But you know, he just didn't understand that the Germans have this concept where they kind of get a thrill out of seeing other people's pain, which sounds like sadism, but I mean, this is a whole country torturing whole masses of people and not doing anything or saying anything about it, right? I mean, it happened. The Nazis did that to a lot of different groups, not just the Jewish population, but also gypsies and homosexuals and people with physical abnormalities. Anyway, they have a word for it. So here we are. We're fighting in Germany. We free the concentration camps. We freed whoever was left in the concentration camps. And we didn't realize, because we're not from the same culture, we didn't realize that they may have gotten a real buzz out of it. They really got a thrill out of watching other people suffer, as horrible as that sounds. And the word Schadenfreude, and if you try to, well, you can look it up, you can try to find a translation of Schadenfreude, and this is what you're going to get: pleasant feeling from seeing someone else's pain. You're not going to find a single word that has anything to do with any of that stuff. The Ifaluk is they are on the islands, the Micronesian islands. It is a group on the Micronesian islands. They have a word called fago, which doesn't have an equivalent in English. Fago is a mark of maturity that shows compassion for the weak and love and sadness for others, or for individuals who are weaker than you are. So if you were playing in a football game, if these guys, they don't play football, but if they did, if they played in a football game and the other team was weaker than they may tank the game just because it doesn't feel right to punish a weaker opponent. The Ifaluk. They have a word for it. It's called fago, Fago is a drink from I don't know. There's somebody who makes Fago Brow. It's a soda pop. Anyway, okay. So the Ifaluk, the Germans and the Japanese, they all have words that we don't have in the United States. In China, they can't translate the word self-esteem. There is no concept of self-esteem in China, which seems a little odd, doesn't it? I mean, here we have a word and they don't even have the concept. It doesn't even exist for them. Self-esteem. Now, if you think of the Chinese, of course, are a collectivist country. And because they're a collectivist country, individual feelings of self-worth don't mean anything, because they get their self-worth from the group, not from as an individual. So the whole concept of self-worth or self-esteem doesn't exist for them, as interesting as that is. So how in the world do we deal with the Chinese? How can we possibly deal with them if they don't have any of these individualistic feelings that we have as Americans? The answer is, it's not going to be the easiest thing in the world. And this is one of the reasons why when we were fighting in Germany, of course, we didn't have that much trouble fighting the Germans, because we had a lot of Americans who were German, of German extraction. So it wasn't that difficult to fight against the Germans, because we understood what they were thinking. But when we fought against the Japanese, we had a terrible time fighting against the Japanese. The Japanese would not surrender. We couldn't get these guys to surrender. Now, what we wanted to do was capture them, and then we could question them and find out what they knew, and maybe get some really good information from them. But if we were about to capture them, they would take a hand grenade and they'd pull the pin and explode it in their stomach so that they would kill themselves. So we couldn't capture them. We captured hardly anybody the first 3 or 4 battles we fought. It wasn't until late 1944 that we finally started capturing Japanese. The Japanese were the guys that had those banzai attacks. I mean, whole masses of men, and sometimes they wouldn't even have their rifles loaded. So here they are attacking the American forces, and we're just wiping them out, each and every man we were killing. And they were called banzai attacks. They had kamikaze attacks, where an individual would, they'd put a bomb in an airplane, and he'd fly the airplane and try to run it into a ship and sink the ship. And they were called kamikaze attacks. It was a suicide attack. All of these were suicide attacks. We'd never seen anything like that before. We're still confused when somebody straps explosives to their chest and then walks into a building and explodes the vest. It's a suicide attack. We don't understand that. It doesn't make any sense to us because we're Americans. So we don't understand that. And it makes us mad. I mean, if you've ever been in a situation like that. Suicide bombers. What's that all about? So the different cultures are different. I mean, the cultures are different, and we need to understand these things. This individual was willing to die for their religion. They're willing to die for their, we're willing to die for our countries, but they were willing to die for their religion. And that just didn't make any sense to us. So now I have some mistranslations. Mistranslations. This is at a hotel in China. The sign says, please don't accept strangler's invitation so as not to be cheated. They didn't really mean strangler, they meant stranger, I hope. Okay. This is a sign in another Chinese store. Please don't touch yourself. Let us help try you out. Which sounds really obscene, but what they're actually trying to say is, please don't touch the merchandise. We'll help you. We'll help you find the merchandise you're looking for. That's what they were trying to say. But it sounds like it sounds like something really nasty and dirty. But they didn't mean it that way. I don't think. I hope not anyway. This is a sign in a Cambodian hotel, wishing you bon voyage. Of course it's French, and bon voyage means good voyage, have a good voyage. But bon voyage, I looked up bon in French, and it means an instrument that you smoke marijuana out of. That's what it means in French. It also means the same thing in English, of course. But they weren't talking about smoking marijuana, which is illegal in Cambodia, by the way. This is a sign in a Hong Kong bathroom: for keeping toilet clean and tidy, please dump at the dustbin. You can take that any way you want. Let's keep those toilets clean. Go ahead, and if you have to deposit any waste, put your waste in the waste paper basket. I don't know, that doesn't make any sense either. All right. A sign in a Japanese street: when carrying a parasol, please be careful to get in the way of other people around you. Huh? Please be careful not to get in the way of other people. I guess they missed a word. Oh well, not important. Sign in a Japanese drugstore: we make up prescriptions. No, you don't. You fill prescriptions, you don't make them up. The doctor makes them up, and you fill them. This is a sign in the Bucharest hotel lobby. The lift is being fixed for the next day. During that time, we regret that you will be unbearable. Which means they can't carry you, is what they meant to say. But unbearable, of course, means that you're... I don't know, it's a joke. Well, it's not a joke, it's what the sign said. They're unbearable. Nothing worse than being unbearable. Sign in the Paris Hotel: please leave your values at the front desk. I'm guessing instead of values they meant valuables, not values. Okay. Just a thought. This is a sign at an Athens hotel. Visitors are expected to complain at the office between the hours of 9 and 11 a.m. daily. Okay, so if you visit there, you have to go and complain between 9 and 11. To be a good. This is a little strange. This is at a Japanese hotel. You are invited to take advantage of the chambermaid, which doesn't have anything to do with sex either. We're hoping. And it is a Japanese hotel. I think they mean utilize the chambermaid to help you clean your room, I'm guessing. Dresses for street walking. This is at a Paris dress shop. Street walking, of course, is prostitution. The reason I put this picture up here is because when I was in Europe, you could tell the people waiting for a bus, and you could tell the people waiting for their next client by the way they crossed their legs. Okay, if they were a prostitute, they crossed their ankles. I know, it's kind of weird. So as you're driving along the road in Germany or France or wherever you are, and there's a prostitute and she's looking for a client, she will cross her ankles. Just her ankles. And that means I'm a prostitute. If she stood in any other way, then she wasn't a prostitute. So now you know who to stop. I mean, if you're looking for a good time and you're looking for a prostitute, then you would not stop and ask somebody that was just standing there with their hands on their hips. You wouldn't stop. Okay, anyway, I just thought I'd show you that. Of course, that was a long time ago. I was in Europe between 79 and 82. Actually, I was there again in 89, so, and we saw exactly the same thing. So, not that I ever visited the prostitute, but it's legal in Germany, as interesting as that is. They have brothels. I know. They have brothels in Amsterdam, the famous red light district of Amsterdam. This is a sign in a German campground. It is strictly forbidden on our Black Forest camping site that people of different sex, for instance, men and women, live together in one tent unless they are married with each other for that purpose. Wow, that's a tough one. In other words, you can't get in the tent. Two people of opposite sex can't get in the same tent unless they're married. That's what they're trying to say, but I'm not sure that's exactly what that says. This is a Soviet weekly newspaper. There will be a Moscow exhibition of arts by 15,000 Soviet Republic painters and sculptors. These were executed over the past 2 years. I'm sure they didn't execute all those painters. 15,000 painters and sculptors. They didn't execute them. This is in a Majorcan shop. Majorca is an island in the Mediterranean Sea. Here, speaking American. We speak American. We speak American. Okay. Anyway, poor translations. Even for relatively fluent speakers, word choice can be a problem. The most commonly used method of ensuring that a translation is accurate is to have someone translate the translation back into English. Okay, so you're thinking that you want to do research. You've got a survey. The survey has been standardized in the United States. It's been standardized in other countries. You want to translate that survey into whatever language is being spoken in a different country. So one of the things you'll do is you'll have somebody translate the English into that language. Let's say Spanish. You'll have them translated into Spanish. And then you'll have a Spanish speaker translate it back into English to make sure that it says exactly what you think it says. Okay? It's a good way to do things, so you get it translated back. If it's a really complex language, Finnish is one of the most complex languages. We do not read Arabic very well as Americans. When Muammar Gaddafi was the leader in, what is that? Algeria. It wasn't Algeria, where was it? Libya. When Muammar Gaddafi was the leader in Libya, Time magazine spelled his name with a K, Newsweek spelled his name with a G, and somebody else spelled it with a Q. Yeah, they spelled his last name with a Q. So here we have 3 different magazines, and they all spell his name differently. Now you knew who it was: Gaddafi, Gaddafi, or Qaddafi. You knew who it was, but they all started his name with a different letter. And that's because in Arabic it doesn't translate exactly. It doesn't translate directly. So it would be, I mean, there's no letters. Their letters are groups of, syllables instead of letters. It's singular letters. Response biases are factors that distort the accuracy of a person's response to surveys, and they become especially problematic when we compare groups that differ in their response biases. Some people will try to seem more socially desirable in their answers and disguise their true feelings to appear more socially desirable. So what if I gave you guys a survey? Would you try to seem smart? Would you try to do things in the middle, so that you wouldn't be extremely in one direction or extremely negative or extremely positive? How would you do it? If I did research on, I can't do research on the Navajo reservation, but if I did, how would you answer? You're trying to make me happy. Or maybe you hate me and you want to piss me off. The survey? So it would depend on the survey. What if it was a survey about family relationships?
And make it seem like my family is like your family.
a good family, so you do it in a positive manner. You do it in a positive manner. There are, and this is known as response biases. So we would have to know what your response bias was. We would have to know that, that you try to be as positive as possible, especially if we're talking about food. What if we're talking about bellinghauns? Would you try to be as positive as you would about your family? Yeah, sure, why not? Okay, that makes me feel better. I'll be all right in a minute. Okay. But there are some countries where they always answer everything right in the middle. So they don't want to seem too positive. They don't want to seem too negative. It's called mediocrity. They want to be mediocre. They want everything to be right in the middle. So if we were in China, if we were in East Asia, if we were in Japan, they would try to answer everything right in the middle. So we wouldn't get an extreme answer to anything. No positives, no negatives. We just get everything right in the middle. So it makes it difficult to do those kinds of surveys. Most of our surveys have Likert scales on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is extremely and 5 is not at all. Where are you? And most people would say, I'm a 3. I'm a 3. I'm a 3. Everything's right in the middle. Right? So you have to be really careful about response bias. And you have to understand the population that you're dealing with, whether they are extremely positive or extremely negative. That's really important. There is a tendency for people from different cultures to vary in terms, and I just talked about all of this stuff, to be extreme, either extreme or mediocre. So they're extremely positive, extremely negative, or mediocre. So they'll, and you need to understand how that culture works. African Americans and Hispanic Americans tend to give more extreme responses than Americans of European descent. Did you guys know that? So if I were doing, and I've done research in Los Angeles with a primarily Hispanic population. And you always got either a 1 or a 5. You never got a 3. Everything was extreme. So even if they were feeling maybe, I mean, it should have been a 3, they would still answer either a 1 or a 5. As interesting as that is. With the same research that we were doing, it was educational research. We were seeing the same thing in the African American population. We didn't have that many white people that we were doing any research with. We were doing research with junior high school students, the public junior high school students in Los Angeles. And oddly enough, there were black high schools, there were Hispanic high school or junior high schools, but there were hardly any white junior high schools. As odd as that seems. So where did the white kids go in Los Angeles? Where did they go? I mean, we did it all. We did it in the valley. So we were over there in Northridge, in Anaheim, in Pasadena. We were in Beverly Hills.
Wait, did you say you went to public high schools?
Yeah, we only went to public high school.
So they were probably at
private high schools. Exactly. There you go. That's it. I know. And I was shocked. There were no white kids. They were all Hispanic. They were all black. There were hardly any white kids at all in the public schools. They were all going to private school. Wait a minute, this changes things completely, doesn't it? So if we're talking about education in California, especially in the Los Angeles area, the public schools don't have any white kids in it. The white kids are all at private schools. I know, it was just the most bizarre thing in the world. When was I there? Wait a minute. I was there in '99 and 2000. And we did education. We were doing educational research. It was drug research. It was really kind of interesting. We were trying to find out how much knowledge these kids had about drugs. It was really kind of fascinating. So and a lot of times the boys would brag that they knew everything. They knew everything about drugs. And then the girls, even if they knew something about drugs, we didn't know anything about drugs. That kind of a situation. So it's kind of fascinating. East Asians tend to be more moderate in their responses than European Americans. East Asians show a great moderacy bias when they complete the materials of their native language than when they complete them in English. So when they are actually using English, they have one personality, and when they use their own language, they have a totally different personality, as odd as that may seem. So how in the world do you get rid of this? How do you get rid of the biases, the response biases? You get rid of it by taking out the Likert scale. You don't let them be mediocre. You force them to either say yay or nay, or maybe, sometimes maybe, but not very often. Usually it's yes or no. Now you force them to say something. But one of the reasons that we use surveys, one of the reasons we use Likert scales is because it has numbers in it. And you've been around statisticians, you've talked to Dr. Wolf, right? Or Dr. Kine, and these individuals do things with statistics. So there has to be numbers. Well, a Likert scale has numbers, and we can actually add all these numbers up, and we can use them in our statistics. But a yes or a no, wait a minute, it's either a 1 or a 0. Come on, let's get real. That's not statistics. So that kind of screws up your statistics if you use a yes or no answer to your question. Tendency to agree with most statements is known as acquiescence bias and is an issue for cross-cultural comparisons. They just want to seem positive. And we're going to talk about Asians in just a second. A lot of times these individuals just want to, or people of different religions, they have different philosophies than we do. We like to see things as right or wrong, right? But they see something right and something wrong in just about every statement that you make. It makes it very difficult. The acquiescence bias is a problem for cross-cultural research because cultures differ in their tendencies to agree with items. So if we're talking about a Hispanic community, we're talking about people that always have an extreme answer. Same thing in the African American community. However, in the white community, we have a totally different reaction. So it all depends on culture, as exciting as all that is. East Asians tend to have a relatively holistic way of looking at the world, and one consequence is that there is more possible truths in a holistic world. So they see possibilities. So it's really difficult for them to argue yes or no. It's not a yes or no question as far as they're concerned. Well, in this case it would be a yes, in this case it would be a no. Philosophically, I can see how you can say that, but according to my philosophy, of course, it would be a no. So they can argue both sides, which is always irritating and very difficult to quantify. This tends to make them see truth in almost all statements. And this is an individual from India. This is an individual from China. This is an individual from Southeast Asia, which is where Korea is. Indonesia is in Southeast Asia. Malaysia is in Southeast Asia. So this is like half the world's population. India has 1.2 billion people. China has 1.5 billion people. That's 2.7 billion people right there. There's only 7 billion people in the world. So most of them have this strange acquiescence bias. People tend to evaluate themselves by comparing themselves with others. Usually they find somebody who is similar to them, and they will compare themselves to that person. This is known as reference group effect. So when you're in high school, if I can look at the way that you're dressed today, and if I looked at the people that you went to high school with and how they dressed, that would be your reference group. That is your reference group effect. That's a reference group bias. So potentially you're wearing the same types of clothes that people in your high school wore. If you're a little bit older, you probably have gotten away from wearing those goofy clothes anyway. If I did, I would be wearing bell-bottom trousers. Some guys used to wear white t-shirts, and they would roll their cigarettes up in their t-shirts. I know, it was so cool. And then they wore what we called peg pants. They were pegged. These were jeans, and they would cut the inside seam out, They cut the inside seam, and then they would sew them up so that they could just barely get them on their legs. And they called them peg pants. And there was no cuff. So, I mean, it was really tight. And of course, now people are wearing really tight pants again. This is so weird. We did this when we were kids. Or they would wear the white t-shirt, and then they would wear the peg pants, and there would be about this much cuff, and they would just roll it up, not fold it up, they'd roll it up. So they had that much cuff. But that was cool, right? Okay. And I'm not wearing those clothes, so evidently that wasn't my reference group. All right. When we are assessing ourselves in terms of how tall, how intelligent, or how punctual we are, what matters is how tall, intelligent, or punctual we view ourselves compared to most other people around us. So that would be the people you went to high school with. That would be the people at this college. When you go away to college, a lot of times what you do is you change your reference groups. And then when you go home, you're not acceptable to the people that you were acceptable to before. Because you've changed your reference group. So you've changed your hair. You've changed your clothes. And the people that you were around before don't accept that because they think that you have changed. You're putting on airs because you're a college student. And we see this all the time. So a lot of people can't go home after they go to college. Sometimes it's a good thing to change your reference group. I had a friend from, a colleague who was from Alabama. And he hated it. He hated Alabama. He thought they were a bunch of rednecks. He thought they were hicks. He thought they were hillbillies. He didn't really like them at all. He didn't speak with a southern accent, and he could barely understand what anybody else was saying because their accent was so strong. So he went to Brown University, which is in Rhode Island, I think. I think it's in Rhode Island. Anyway, he went up north to go to college. And when he came back to visit his parents, he couldn't hang out with anybody, even his nerdy friends, because he couldn't speak with them anymore. Because he spoke with a northern accent now instead of a southern accent. So he wasn't acceptable to them. They don't like Yankees in the South very much. That's why when I lived in Mississippi, I had a little bit of a hard time. They couldn't understand what I was saying. Like my accent is so strong that they couldn't understand what I was saying, okay? That's so stupid. Well, why you talk so fast? I don't understand. You say words they're so short. You know, they put like 7 syllables in a word that only should have 2. I mean, it's really kind of strange. I wasn't acceptable to those people. I talked too fast. And I taught when I was in Mississippi University for Women, and East Mississippi Community College. Okay, so we have this reference group effect. Reference group effect is critical for cross-cultural research because people from different cultures tend to evaluate themselves by comparing themselves to different reference groups and thus to different standards. The book that you're going to start reading, they talk about women getting their eyes fixed, and they have 2 eyelids. Yeah, okay. So what are they doing? Well, these are Asian women who have a fat pad underneath their eyelid. And what they're doing is they're going in and they're taking that fat pad out.
Has to be bigger.
Makes their eyes look rounder. Yeah. Because people talk about Asians, you know, they have the slanted eyes. Well, they don't really have slanted eyes. They just have an extra layer of fat inside their eyelids. I don't know why. It's just a little bit different. My sister has a fat pad underneath her eyelids. So she looks kind of Asian, but she's not Asian at all. We're Western European completely. So what's happening in Japan is that they're dyeing their hair a different color. It's not black. If you've ever been to Japan, everybody has black hair. But of course, the teenagers are changing their hair color, and they're having eye surgery done, which costs about $200 to have that fat pad taken out of there. And so they have these big round eyes. So so it's a different reference group. It's really kind of bizarre. Personally, I find Asian women fairly attractive, relatively attractive. I don't think they need to take out that fat pad. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know why they want to look like Reese Witherspoon, who's from Texas, with her blonde hair and big blue eyes. And they're putting contact lenses in their eyes to make their eyes different colors. Now the blue eyes, that's something. The light brown eyes, that's something else. But they're putting like yellow eye. I know, and so their irises are yellow. Ugh, they look feline or something. Understanding the reference group conundrum, the researcher should always be aware of the reference group effect. It will change the way that they react to things. One classic example of reference group effect was a study done looking at African American soldiers in 1949, while the South was still suffering from Jim Crow. So they were prejudiced against black people. They didn't like black people. If you were black, you couldn't get a job in the South, unless you were a black female and you could get a job as a domestic. In other words, you could clean people's houses, but that was about it. No matter how much education you had, that's the only job that was available to you. And if you were a black male, there were no jobs for you, unless it was carrying something or hauling something, doing manual labor for pennies. The soldiers were, so they looked at the African American soldiers in 1949. Interestingly, in 1949 is when they integrated the Army. Before 1949, they had segregated units. So if you were black and you were in the United States Army, then you were either in a black unit or you weren't in the Army. That's the way it was.
And they put them like as cooks and
right.
details.
Exactly. They became cooks, they became, yeah, exactly. During World War II, if you've ever watched 1941, the guy that won the, he didn't win the Congressional Medal of Honor. He shot down a couple of airplanes, a couple of Japanese airplanes. I can't remember his name, but yeah, he was a cook. But you know, he had education, and most educated people just didn't join the Army. They just didn't join the Army because they would be given these menial jobs, as odd as that seems. During World War II, they had a manpower crisis in 1944, going into 1945. So they had to integrate some of the combat units, and they hadn't had any African Americans in any combat units until the end of 1944, the beginning of 1945. And then some of these individuals did some very, very brave things, and they should have earned the Congressional Medal of Honor, but they didn't because they were black. So it wasn't until the 1990s that these individuals were actually given the awards that they should have gotten in the 1940s, as strange as that may seem. But in 1949, they integrated all the units. So there were no segregated units anymore in the military. That includes the Marine Corps. The Marines claimed that they wouldn't take any African Americans in their corps, but they did in 1949 by presidential order. So in 1949, they did a survey with the African American soldiers, and they asked them how they liked it. The soldiers were less satisfied about living in the North than living in the repressive South. Despite the fact they couldn't go to town in the South, despite the fact that they could do anything they wanted in the North, they still liked it better in the South. And you'd have to ask yourself, well, what the hell was, what was going on? What could possibly be going on? Were they getting better treatment in the South than they were in the North? I mean, obviously not. They were being treated like not second-class citizens, but citizens that can't possibly go any place that they want. There were certain places they couldn't go. They couldn't look at a white woman without getting in trouble for looking at her. They certainly couldn't whistle at her. They couldn't leer at her in the South. But in the North, of course, they could do anything that they wanted because people didn't treat them the same. So what in the world was going on? With analysis, they found that the soldiers gave their answers because they were using local African Americans as their reference group. So in the South, they were comparing themselves to the African Americans that were living in the South. When then they were in the North, they were comparing themselves with other African Americans living in the North. And since their reference group was different, they saw the South as better than the North, despite the fact that the treatment was much, much better in the North than it was in the South. Okay. When asked how much people valued enjoying life and pleasure, the results showed that the dour East Germans, and I've been to East Germany, it is not the most pleasant place in the world. There is no East Germany anymore, of course. The wall went down in 1989, but this survey was done before the wall went down. So they were talking to East Germans, and these guys never smile. The only time you'll ever get an East German to smile is if you slit your wrist and he watches you bleed to death. Then he might smile. I was in Berlin. I was in Berlin. I was at the Bahnhof, which is a train station. And we were just kind of standing there waiting to see what was going on. And, well, we were there to see when the next train was leaving. But, so we're standing there, and all of a sudden this guy has a heart attack. And he's like, I don't know, he's maybe a quarter of a mile away. Bahnhofs are these huge buildings. Anyways, about a quarter of a mile away from us. And this guy has a heart attack. So what do you do if somebody has a heart attack? What would you do if somebody had a heart attack? Try to get help. Of course you try to get help. Anybody would try to get help. Well, that's what we do in the United States. What did the Berliners do? As they watched this guy die. And and somehow the emergency people started coming in, and they wouldn't let him get to him. They blocked his way. They wouldn't let him, and he died. They all wanted to watch him die. They're all getting as close to him as they possibly can to watch to see if he's gasping or not. I mean, it was nuts. And that's the Germans. And they're smiling because, well, they're getting to see something. You know, something exciting is happening. So they're all kind of, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Anyway, this is back in 1981, 82, when I was in Berlin. Anyway, so I got to see the East Germans, not the happiest people in the world. However, when they did a survey looking at how much they enjoyed life and how much pleasure they got out of life, they came in third. They came in number 3, despite the fact that these are the grouchiest people you ever want to meet. I went to northern Germany in June. We were shipping our car back, and we had to go to Bremerhaven. It snowed in June. That wasn't the worst situation. It snowed in July. The ship was supposed to go out in July, and they got snowed in. It snows in July. How pleasant is that? That's northern Germany. Okay, so the Italians, I don't know if you've ever been around the Italians, they eat spaghetti, they have family meals, they laugh a lot, they yell at each other a lot, but they are the happiest people that you ever want to meet. They take month-long vacations in August. It's always in August or July. These people came in last in enjoying life and pleasure. They came in last. And the Germans, who were the grouchiest people in the whole wide world, they came in third. Now, how in the world does that happen? Well, it must be reference group effect. Compared to my neighbors who parties every night, well, I don't enjoy life nearly as much as he does. However, if I'm in Germany and I just watch somebody die, wow, my life's pretty damn good, I guess. And I enjoy life a lot because I got to watch that guy croak. And I saw a lot of pleasure in watching that guy expire. What a horrible story that is. I apologize, but that's exactly what happened. That was the dumbest thing in the world. And here we are, so we're soldiers there, right? We're Americans, and we're trying to clear these people out. You know, that we're there for a softball. We're there for a softball tournament. So, you know, there's like 10 of us, and we're trying to get these guys out of the way. And it worked. You know, they'd move out of the way, but as soon as we got past them, they moved right back where they were before. So here we're clearing a path for us, and as soon as we get to the end, you know, we're trying to help these guys get through, it's filled in again. It didn't work at all. So we tried to make another path through, and they followed right behind us, and we finally got to the piece. Of course, I was a medic. I should have gone and tried to help him. I went the other direction. I was trying to, I don't know. You know, if he had died, maybe he would have sued me or something. train station in the city. On the humility scale of arrogant Americans, we scored higher on the scale than the humble Chinese. The Chinese are very humble people. But we had a higher humility score than they did. And I don't know if you've ever been overseas, but if you've ever been overseas, you know how arrogant Americans really are. We think that we run the world. We don't, but we think we do. The collectivist Chinese scored higher on the choosing one's own goals scale. In China, you take a test. And if you get a certain score, then you get to go to school for this. In the United States, if I want to be a firefighter, I can be a firefighter. I can do anything that I want. I can go to school for anything that I want. However, they scored higher than we did on choosing one's own goals. They can't choose their own goals, but it's their reference group. The deprivation effect involves people valuing things that they have little of rather than what they have in abundance. Thus, since there is a dearth of humbleness among Americans, they value humility much more than the Chinese do, who are taught humility from birth. And this has to do with the deprivation effect. So if we have lots and lots of money, we think that's all we think about is money. How important is money to us? Well, it's really important to people in the United States, but they may score higher than we do on how important money is to them if they don't have very much money. And that's known as the deprivation effect. So the more you have, the less you think about. The less you have, the more you think about. And that's known as the deprivation effect. And they have no idea why I put Oreo in there. I want more. I don't know what that means. Subjective self-report measures work fine within cultures because cultural members tend to share the same response biases and the same reference groups. So we can compare them with themselves, but we can't compare them with us because we have different reference groups. Subjective self-report measures do not work well between cultures because the members have different response styles and reference groups. So you can't really compare. It's like comparing apples and oranges. You can compare oranges to oranges. You can compare tangerines to oranges because tangerines are citrus fruits and so are oranges, but you can't compare apples to oranges. And we are apples and they are oranges. So we can't really compare them to us. Cross-cultural studies are possible, but one variable that cannot be manipulated is cultural background. The comparisons of cultures are not true experiments, but quasi-experiments. So if we're trying to compare cultures, we really can't do it. Because one culture will be different from another culture. So if we were doing research with American Indians, we could compare Navajos to Navajos, but we couldn't compare Navajos to Hopis. Two different cultures. Two very different cultures. Right? You don't even live in similar communities. You guys are all spread out. They live right on top of each other in their pueblos. Right? So you really couldn't compare. It's like would be comparing apples and oranges. You can't control for culture unless it's not a factor. But other independent variables can. And one of the things that I did when I did my own research, I looked at culture to find out if the culture was leading to the resilience. So my dependent variable was resilience, and all my independent variables, I looked at all those independent variables to see how they affected resilience. Does that make sense? And culture was one of those independent variables. So was age, so was gender, so was level of trauma, and education was the other.
What about culture? Was it the language that you looked at?
I had a survey that found out how they felt about their own culture.
Oh, okay. So it was just overall culture. How they
Right. Yeah. I didn't ask them if they spoke their language. I didn't ask them whether they went to powwows. This is something else. So, yeah. And one of the things that, one of the reasons I got in trouble was because I didn't use spirituality. They wanted us to use, there were select individuals who looked at my research and said, you need to measure spirituality. I know. Well, there's a scale that you can use. There's a spirituality scale that you can use. So they wanted me to do that. But I didn't want to do that because I didn't want that to be a factor. I was just looking at culture. And I was looking at all these things that fed into resilience. And spirituality, the other problem with spirituality is that there are lots of different types of spirituality. So, can I really compare Christianity to traditionalism? I know. And we had, the other problem that we had on that reservation was that the Catholic Church were the missionaries that came to that reservation. So we had this really strong Catholic tradition, but we also had an evangelical group that had come onto the reservation. And they'd been there for about 20 years. Mm-hmm. So we had, there was always this argument going on between the traditionalists and the evangelicals. Because evangelicals said that to practice your own traditionalism was practicing Satanism. The Catholics didn't care. But I didn't want to get into that whole mess. This is how bad it was. This is how bad it was, okay? The people that were evangelicals would not capitalize their last names. So if their name were, if they had an Indian name, like Donnie or Stiffarm or whatever, they wouldn't capitalize it because they were embarrassed by their last name. Doesn't that sound stupid? I know, it just drove me nuts. So you could tell if somebody was an evangelical because they would not capitalize their first name, their last name. But if they weren't, if they were a traditionalist or they were Catholic, they would capitalize their last name. I know, it drove me nuts. So I'd have students in the classroom, and they'd write their names, and if they wrote it with a small letter for the beginning of the last name, I knew that they were an evangelical, and I had to be careful with them because they would take every opportunity to start proselytizing. So I couldn't bring up certain topics because they would say, all of a sudden they would get up and start praising Jesus, you know. I know. I didn't want that. I don't need that in my classroom. Maybe I do need Jesus in my classroom. No, I know, I don't. I'm okay. We'll just do it the way we got it, okay? This works okay. Does all that make sense? Do you understand what was going on? Okay. So I couldn't use spirituality because there was too much controversy involved with it. But culture was okay. Because even the evangelicals knew their culture. And they'd go to powwows. And most of them wouldn't dance, but they would go to powwows. At least they went to the powwows. And their grandkids danced, so they were okay. After randomly assigning subjects to groups, a researcher can administer different levels of the independent variable to each group. Any differences in their responses or behaviors, and this is right out of Sue and Sarah's lecture about doing research. This is how you do it. This is how you do it. Second method of doing cross-cultural research is within group manipulation. Each participant receives more than one level of the independent variable within group manipulation, and yada, yada, yada. It's the same thing that Sue and Sarah have been telling you. This is kind of an interesting picture. Are you guys offended by this picture? This is a commercial from Korea. And if you notice, this kid is holding an Oreo cookie. It's really kind of an interesting picture. Past research has explored cultural messages in domains as diverse as magazine advertisements, and this is a magazine advertisement from Korea showing a baby nursing and potentially eating an Oreo cookie in between slurps or something, I don't know. Just like we all eat our Oreos with a glass of milk, and this guy's got a form of milk. Okay, there we go. I don't know. So are you guys offended by this? Are you okay with nursing A picture of a nursing baby. Is that all right? Are we okay with this? What do you think? Did I cross the line? I've been trying to cross the line. I can't find where the line is.
Is this an ad for Oreo?
I'm sorry?
Is this an ad for Oreo?
Yeah, it says right there in the corner, Oreo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's an advertisement from Korea. It says milk and something cookie. I can't read the rest of it. I know, it's really kind of bizarre, isn't it? Okay. Past research has explored cultural messages and domains as diverse as laws. China, in 2013, China passed a law that adult children must visit their parents often. There you go. That's a law. You've got to visit your parents often if you live in China, which seems a little odd to me. Let's define what often is. Is it once a year? Once a month? Once a quarter? I don't know. Once every century? No, probably not. Past research has explored cultural messages and domains as diverse as fairy tales. The oldest written fairy tale is Abdullah the Fisherman and Abdullah the Merman, written in 850 in Persia. And this is a picture from the first fairy tale. And that's the merman that Abdullah has captured here. And Abdullah obviously is a fisherman. The past research has explored cultural messages and domains as diverse as children's stories. And of course, this is one of the first children's stories from India. Past research has explored cultural messages and domains as diverse as sports coverage. How do we cover our sports as compared to other places? You might be surprised to find out that they cover sports differently in Canada than they do in the United States. We don't show as much violence as the Canadians do. The Canadians like to see somebody get wiped out. They love to see that. So if they're showing a hockey game, they don't show the goals. They show where somebody got splashed up against the boards. I know. They don't show the touchdown pass. They show the guy hitting the guy that caught the pass and getting wiped out. So they show a lot more violence. And they also show fights. They love the fights in hockey. Of course, they're trying to do away with the fights, which is really kind of interesting. So we like to see people score a lot. We like to see the winner. In a soccer game, if we show a soccer game, we show the goals. They may show one of the best tackles, where the guy gets wiped out and he's laying on the ground, writhing in pain. Different. Okay. Past research has explored cultural messages and domains as diverse as personal ads. Personal ads, of course, they put in the ad, I live in New York City, I'm 5'7", I like to take walks on the beach and drink wine or something. That would be a personal ad. We don't really do that in the United States very much anymore. Past research has explored cultural messages in domains as diverse as web pages. If you look at a web page in East Asia, they're much more complex. We're trying to show our attributes. We're trying to make it simple enough so that people can look at it and decide whether they like it or not. If we were looking at a web page from China or Japan or Korea, what we would see would be a lot of intricate, confusing information. So they just fill theirs with information. We fill ours with pictures of our dogs, right? No, cats. Cats. We show our cats. As strange as that may be. Key point to realize about research is that no single study is perfect. Every study has potential methodological shortcomings or alternative theoretical explanations. One important skill that students learn in graduate school in psychology is precisely how to come up with alternative explanations for virtually any study that they encounter. And this is one of the reasons why I want you to do article critiques I'm using article critiques in psychology and law and in physiological psych. I want you to be critical thinkers, and I really can't teach you to be critical thinkers. You have to do it on your own. So I want you to read these articles, and I want you to see the flaws in these articles. There are flaws in just about all research. And I hope that your other professors are telling you that. I'm assuming that they are. Is Dr. Wolf telling you that? Is Dr. Kine telling you that? Dr. Kine used to be a researcher, so I'm not exactly sure what she's telling you guys. But I was trying to get a job in Denver at Arapahoe Community College, and I mentioned the fact that not all research is good research, and some of it is flawed, and I lost the job because, they were researchers, so they didn't see any flaws in any research. They assumed that all research was good, and I lost the job. You can imagine what a wonderful instructor I would have been. No, I'm just kidding. I would have hated to live in Denver. In science, researchers and readers of research use the principle of Occam's razor. Now, you may have heard of Occam's razor before. They talk about it on the Big Bang Theory. I've read it in several different places. Occam's razor just means the simplest explanation is usually the right explanation. The more complex it is, the more likely that it's incorrect. And that's what Occam's razor means. You need to shave it down to its simplest form. The more complicated it is, the more likely that it's incorrect. The simpler it is, the more likely that it's correct. Occam's razor. As odd as that seems, and it seems like a lot of very intelligent people try to make things as complicated as they possibly can. And that's incorrect. You don't learn anything from complexity. You need to make it so that you understand it. It needs to be presented in that manner. Following Occam's razor, a single explanation is more parsimonious and more likely to be correct than 4 separate explanations. And that's Occam's razor. Which isn't any fun. No, it's okay. We're going to talk about violence in the South. I have a brother, I have 3 brothers actually. 2 of my brothers live in Indiana and 1 of my brothers lives in South Carolina. My 2 brothers that live in Indiana do not own, well, one of them owns a gun, but it's a rifle. I mean, it's not like he carries it around. My other brother doesn't have a weapon. I'm not armed, I'm not dangerous, don't worry about me. But I have a brother that lives in South Carolina that has a gun on his hip every time he goes out of the house. He has like 5 guns in his house. Now you have to ask yourself, we all grew up in the same place. We all grew up with the same parents. We all heard the same stories. So why is one brother more paranoid than the other 3? Why is his world more dangerous than my world? Where I live, there's hardly any white people, right? Almost everybody's native, right? Okay, you guys aren't dangerous. I don't see you as dangerous. If you are, then don't tell me, because I'll just live in my fantasy world where I'm not about to be shot or something. But I have a brother that lives in a very dangerous world. He lives in South Carolina, and he's about to get hit by a hurricane, and he doesn't realize it. I don't know. Maybe I should call him tonight. What do you think? Should I call him tonight? What do you think, Travis? Call my brother? He's a conservative jerk. I know we're going to get into a political argument about whether Trump knows what he's talking about. But I'm concerned about the hurricane headed toward him. But he carries a gun wherever he goes. His world is a lot more dangerous than mine. I lived in black communities in Washington, D.C., and I certainly wasn't armed, and I didn't feel threatened when I lived in a black community. He lives in a white community, but there are black communities around him, and he's afraid of those black people in South Carolina. I was one of the only white people living in that community, and I didn't feel threatened at all. Was I naive? Is there something wrong with me? Do I think that I'm so powerful that I can fight off any amount of trouble? Is that, am I stupid? Don't answer. Research has always shown that the South is the most violent region in the United States, and that this has been true since the very founding of the nation. The South is more dangerous than every place else in the United States, including the Wild, Wild West. The Wild West was not nearly as dangerous. No matter how many gunfights at the OK Corral were taking place, no matter how many Billy the Kids were shooting people, it really didn't matter. The South was still more dangerous. If we look at the statistics, the South accounted for 40.9% of all reported violent crimes. This is in 2012. 40.9% of all violent crimes occurred in the South. Northeast, they had almost 500,000. Northeast had almost 200,000. The Midwest had about 250,000. The West had about 280 or 290,000. So the South has 40% of all the violent crimes occur in the South. So maybe my brother is right. Maybe he does need that gun. I live in Iowa, Midwest, 238,712. The safest place in the United States is the Northeast. Even though they have tons and tons of people over here, it's still less dangerous than it is anyplace else. As odd as that sounds. While violence exists in other regions of the country, the Old West, for example, the South has led the nation in lynchings, sniper attacks, feuds, homicides, and duels. Throughout our history, there has been more violence in the South than any place else. Andrew Jackson, the guy on the $20 bill. I think I have one. No, I don't. Andrew Jackson once killed a man in a duel over the honor of his wife, who at the time was married to both Jackson and her first husband, while she was waiting for her divorce. He married her before she was actually divorced, Andrew Jackson. His wife also smoked a pipe and chewed tobacco, which is always attractive in young females. Of course, he was her second husband, so I don't know. Anyway, Andrew Jackson. He was also the guy that the Supreme Court told him that he could not kick the Indians out of the Southeast, and he did it anyway. Even though the Supreme Court told him not to, he did it. And that's what the first Trail of Tears is all about. Your Trail of Tears happened in 1864, right? Okay. Their Trail of Tears happened in 1813 or something like that. So they had to march all the way from Georgia to Oklahoma, which is pretty damn far, pretty far. And it wasn't just the Cherokee, it was also the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Creek, and the Seminole. They all had to march all the way across the country. And they ended up in Oklahoma, which is kind of interesting. Anyway, Andrew Jackson, not the sweetest guy in the whole wide world. Fisher speculates that the South has always been more tolerant for aggressive pursuits. Reports from the colonial days chronicle no-holds-barred fights where eyes were gouged out and noses and ears were bitten off, as fun as that sounds. In the South, they have a thing called purring. This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. Where two men hold each other by the shoulder and they kick each other in the shin until one of them lets go. Does that sound like the stupidest thing in the whole wide world? They put straw inside their pants legs. That's it. And then they kick each other in the shins until somebody lets go. This is what it looks like. As you can see the straw coming out of this guy's pants. Is that the dumbest thing in the world? Who would do that? The South has always been more tolerant than the North concerning corporal punishment of children. Capital punishment for criminals. The #1 state for executions is Texas, who has more executions than all the other states combined. Gun ownership is much higher in the South than it is anyplace else. Going to war whenever the gauntlet is mentioned. The people in the South are strict hawks. They want to fight no matter who they're fighting. Southern high school students are more likely to bring a weapon to school than northern high school students. The South has more school shootings than any place else. If you think of a school shooting, where did it take place? Probably Parkland in Florida. Atlanta has had school shootings. They've had school shootings in Mississippi, in Alabama. Wow. Where else did they have a school shooting? They just had one someplace. Didn't they? Somebody was just shot. There was somebody, 3 people were killed. It wasn't a school shooting though. Anyway, lots of shootings. There have been several theories as to why the South hasn't evolved one way and the rest of the country has evolved another. It's hot and uncomfortable in the South. I don't know if you've ever been there. It's humid and it's hot. It's hot here, but it's not humid here. Greater poverty in the South than in the North. A longer history of slavery where there is tolerance for inhumane treatment. And those are all excuses that they have used. However, Nisbet and Cohen posit that one factor that has led to more violence in the South is that the South was settled by herders, which has given rise to a culture of honor. A culture of honor is one where men strive to protect their reputation through aggression. So people are afraid of each other. If you have a reputation for violence, people will be afraid to attack you. So they try to develop these reputations of being aggressive. Herders are more susceptible to violence because their wealth is more portable, where the land is more marginal. And of course, we see the same thing in the West. If you watch old cowboy movies, they're always talking about rustlers, right? They're herders. That's what a cowboy does. He protects his herd. Joe. Okay, so he needs to protect his herd. Around here, if you, how many acres does it take to graze one cow around here, or a horse? Around here, it takes probably 10 acres. 10 acres for one cow. And if you have less than 10 acres for one cow, they will potentially starve to death. However, in the north, where I come from, the grass is very thick. You can graze 10 cows off of 1 acre of grazing land because the grass is so thick, and we get so much rain up north. We can actually grow stuff up there. And the corn crop this year looks like it's going to be fantastic. Evidently it was raining when I called my wife the other day, so they're getting rain. The soybeans are looking good, which is kind of upsetting people because the tariffs against the Chinese, they're going to have a tariff against soybeans. So these guys are going to lose their shirts over all the soybeans that they have in the fields. Okay, so what's happening? Thus, it is important for herders to develop a reputation of violent retaliation to keep the thieves away from their wealth, and this is known as a culture of honor. The sense of honor has to be established before your wealth is affected. Thus, you need to be violent before anyone tries to steal your livestock. In other words, you need to show people that you are willing to kick the holy hell out of them. So you have to have a violent reputation. If you think about the cowboy movies and some of the things that you see in a cowboy movie, it's the same way. So a ranch owner will be tough, and he will shoot people, and he hangs rustlers, and he shoots people that steal his horses. And this is all known to everybody because they don't want people to come in and rustle their cattle. The herder culture of honor is not limited to the United States, but may have been brought here by the Scots-Irish, who made up the lion's share of people settling in the South. They were herders in the old country. They herded sheep. And of course, when they came to the United States, they started herding either sheep or they started herding cattle. Herders around the world maintain this bloviated code that they show everybody how violent they are. They need to show the people that they aren't going to mess around, that if you mess with me, if you try to steal my stuff, I'm going to kill you. And that's the way you keep them from harassing your herd of sheep or your herd of cows. Looking at the archival data, Nisbet and Cohen found that when you compared records of the rural north with the rural south, they found that not only was the homicide rate higher, but when they compared herding regions of the south with farming regions of the south, the homicide rate was twice that in the herding region. So what does that mean? Does that mean that where you have livestock, you're going to have more violence? I mean, they looked at it at places in the north, and what they discovered was the rural areas in the north, not nearly as much violence. Now this is really kind of interesting because they looked at records before the Civil War. And then during the Civil War, the Union forces, the ones that invaded the South, a lot of times they couldn't win a battle. They just kept losing battle after battle after battle. But of course they weren't really fight. I think we need to stop right now. Yeah, we need to stop right now. We'll pick this up next time. This is really important to me, and maybe I'll call my brother and see how he's doing. Maybe. I won't ask him about the gun that he has. He's got a Glock 11 or something. Anyway, I won't give you that information. That's not important anyway.